Okay, so welcome to our session on using JAWS with Google Drive and Google Docs. Today our presenter is Daniel Keogh in our Melbourne office, and I'm Rebecca Clark. So we're just going to give a bit of an introduction in navigating Google Drive and Google Docs with JAWS. So I will hand over to Danny. Okay, thanks Danny.
Okay, so just bear with us until we get screen sharing. And there we go. Okay. All right. So, Google Drive, Google Docs. A lot of people seem to be using them, and we do get quite a lot of questions about them. Do they work with JAWS? Do they work well with JAWS? Now, the answers to those questions are actually different. What can we expect? What happens? How does it work? So what we'll be doing today is a little bit of a look at exactly what to expect if you go in and start playing around with these things. Now, I am going to make some assumptions here. And the biggest assumption I'm going to make is that anybody who is listening to this, anybody who is watching this, understands how JAWS interacts with internet web pages. You have an understanding of the virtual cursor. You know what the virtual cursor is. You have an understanding of forms mode. You know what forms mode is. If that is not you, then this session is not for you. You need to go and learn the basics and then come back. Because using a screen reader with a setup like this, especially Google Drive, Google Docs is not so bad. But Google Drive, if you're not at least have a little bit of experience with the internet, is going to be difficult for you to understand what is going on. And in some cases, it's going to be impossible for you to understand what's going on. So that's the first assumption. The second assumption is that you are not using Internet Explorer. I would advise against it. Over the last few months, I've noticed that Internet Explorer misbehaves more and more with these applications. And the reason for that is because Internet Explorer is no longer being developed. So as the technology improves and as things get better and as changes are made and as new technologies are brought in, IE is getting left behind. So my advice would be to firstly use Firefox, which is what I'll be using today. If you don't have Firefox, or if you can't get hold of Firefox for whatever reason, Google Chrome would be your next option. Now, as far as I am aware, Google Chrome with JAWS and Google Docs should work fine. Not something I've tested, but it should work fine. There are a couple of issues with Chrome and screen readers, and they are in the process of being sorted out, and there's things that Google needs to do at their end before they can be fully sorted out. But this setup, as far as I know, should work fine for you. Yeah. Okay, so let's have a little bit of a look and see what happens. So the first thing I'm going to do is press a button over here and enable the JAWS audio.
Virtual PC.
So I'm now in just a blank, the Firefox startup screen. So we need to go
Control-L, navigate
onto the address bar and type in drive.google.com.
Enter. Search query edit. Virtual PC. Virtual PC. My Drive dash Google Drive.
Now, at this point, if you were not logged into Google, if you were not logged into your Google account, you would need to log into it. If you don't have a Google account, you need to create one. If you have a Gmail address, you already have one. So there are your three things. Now, at this point, I happen to be logged in, so we're basically set to go. Now, I'm going to have a little bit of a look at this page using
Virtual PC.
the virtual cursor.
Visited link drive. Search Google Drive
So at the
button.
top, we
Search
can
drive.
do searching.
Edit combo. Google Apps 0. Google Notifications
I'm
button.
just
Menu
using the
collapse.
arrow key to move down and getting feedback from JAWS as to exactly what's on the page.
Google account blank. New button menu collapsed. My Drive button menu
And I'm
collapsed.
getting a whole bunch of menus.
Toolbar
which
with
is
3
fine.
buttons. Grid view button, view details, toggle button, settings button, menu collapsed.
And it's not making a lot of sense
Toolbar end. Navigation region.
because that is not the ideal way to navigate something like this. It's definitely not the ideal way to navigate it. Google Drive is set up to work a little bit like File Explorer in Windows. It has menus. It has a menu bar. It has buttons. It has toolbars. It has lists of your folders, lists of where your files are. So navigating it with the JAWS cursor, or with the virtual cursor, is not the ideal way to do it. So what I would suggest is
Off.
you turn the virtual cursor off. And you do that with your JAWS key and Z. Now your JAWS key will either be your caps lock or your insert, depending on how you have your keyboard layout set up. Turn the JAWS key off. There's a couple of reasons for that, and I'll discuss those shortly. Now, let's tab through this interface and see what we get. I've gone back up to the top again. So let's tab through and see what we end up with.
Browser tabs toolbar. Tab. My Drive - Google Drive tab selected. 1 of
Now,
1.
My second piece of advice to you at this point, and my third assumption, is that you know how your browser is laid out. You need to know that because if you start tabbing through and you come off the main page onto the controls that your browser has, and that will happen because they are in the tab order, things like toolbars and the different tabs that are available if you have multiple windows open, that is going to happen at some point. You need to know where the Google Drive page ends and where your browser's controls begin. So you need to learn your browser. So let's tab
Navigation
through all of
toolbar
this.
toolbar. Search or enter address edit. Search using Google Edit combo.
So
Search My Drive - Google Drive read only. Banner region. Folder list view
Now.
list box off. Search Google Drive button. Drive link.
There we go. Now we're
Search
back on.
Google Drive button. Search Drive edit combo collapsed.
So we can search the
options
drive,
button menu.
search
Google
options.
Apps button collapsed.
We've got apps coming
On.
in there.
Off. 0 Google account new button menu.
So we can just keep tabbing through all of this. You can tab through this interface, but look, to be perfectly honest, it's a nightmare because I can tab another 50 times before I actually get to the list of files. I want the list of files. I'm not interested in all of these menus.
My Drive button menu.
And the My Drive button menu.
Toolbar. Grid view button.
And the toolbar with a grid view button. I'm not interested in that. I want to get to my list of files. And this is another reason why you need to be doing this with your virtual PC cursor off, because there are a couple of really, really useful keyboard shortcuts here. Look, there are more than what I'm going to go through, but there's 2 really useful ones as far as I'm concerned. And the Google Drive keyboard shortcuts, a lot of them are made up of 2 keystrokes. The first one being a G, which I'm assuming would be short to go to, and the second one being a letter which tells you which part of the interface to actually get to. So there's 2. There's GN and GL. So if I press GL,
GL, main region, folder list view extended select list box, not selected getting started PDF owned by me last modified by me or
that's what I wanted to hear. Now I'm on the list of files, so I can just use my up and down arrow key.
JAWS specific keystrokes. Docs word owned by me last modified by me 10:37 AM size : 22 kilobytes storage used : 22 kilobytes.
So that's going to give me all sorts of information. It'll tell me the size of the file, tell me who owns it, and the reason it does that is because you can have shared folders. It tells me when it was last modified, or in this case, when I uploaded it. It tells me how much space it's taking up. And there's other information you can get as well. So this is a standard list view. So I can just keep moving down.
On the internet. Docs word owned by me last modified.
Now it knows it's a Word document.
Untitled document. Google Docs owned by
There's
me
an
last
untitled document, which is a Google Doc. I won't go too much into.
Windows keystrokes.docs Word.
So all I'm doing here, standard arrow keys, the same as you would in Internet Explorer. Now, in File Explorer, sorry. Now, one of the things that is not available is what's called first letter navigation. Now, for those who aren't aware, I can demonstrate first letter navigation.
Windows E. This piece. O. Enter. Shell folder view. Bluetooth exchange.
Now, I'm in my documents folder here. So I know
End. XP640 manual.p.
that I have a
Home.
manual for the XP640, which
Day
is my
created
printer. And I know that starts with an X. So no matter where I am in this list, what I can do, and this works on the desktop, this works anywhere where JAWS tells you, well, I should say in most places where JAWS tell you are on a list view or a list box, you can use first letter navigation. So what that effectively means is pressing the first letter of the file or folder you want to get to will take you straight there. Now I know that the manual is called XP640, etc., .pdf. So I'm currently sitting on
Bluetooth exchange folder.
I'm sitting on my Bluetooth exchange folder. So if I press the letter X,
XP600.
straight to it. It's highlighted. If I wanted to at this point in time, I could hit enter and it will just open it in Adobe Reader. I don't want to do that, but I could.
Alt F4. My drive.
That is
Off.
first letter navigation. That is not available
Untitled document.
in the lists with Google Drive. Can't be done. And the reason for that is because, as we demonstrated before, a lot of the shortcuts actually are already used for different keystrokes. Now you can change this view slightly because there's disadvantages to that. If you had a folder with several hundred files in it, which is not impossible, that could very easily happen. I can imagine it'd take you a very, very long time to find out where things are. So it's all alphabetically sorted. You could sit there pressing your down arrow key for half an hour before you get to where you want to go. There's a way that can kind of be got around, and that is by pressing the letter V when we're in the list view.
V. Folder grid view extended select list box.
Now that changes it to a grid. So what that effectively does is it means you now have, as well as up and down,
Windows keys.
you now have to move across left and right as well. So if you have multiple files, it sets it up in columns. You fit more on the screen. You can move down quicker. Instead of moving down by one file at a time, you might be moving down by a block of 5 or a block of 6 files, depending on how wide your grid is. So the letter V when you're in this view is a toggle. So if I press it again,
V. Folder list view.
Takes you straight back to the list view. And JAWS will report whichever one you're on. So that's another reason why first letter navigation is not available here. And I honestly don't see any reason how they could possibly enable it without remapping all of the keys and completely changing the way the whole key commands actually work. So another useful one is GN.
GN. Navigation region. Folders and views tree view.
So this is all your folders, and it's a standard tree view. Now a tree view works by using your up and down arrow keys, your right arrow key, and your left arrow key. So I'll very, very, very quickly go through this because we're not here to demonstrate how tree views work.
Computers. My drive. Closed.
So my drive says closed. Press the right arrow key.
My drive. Open.
That
1 of
opens it.
8.
So we can now, we know there's 8 items under that.
Computers. Closed. Shared with me. Recent. Google Photos.
So
Start.
all of these are just folders that you can easily get to.
Trash. Backups.
So you've got backups, all of that sort of stuff.
Home. Trash. My
I want to get back up to the top, just to where my drive is. No problems, that's done. So you can get to that from anywhere in this interface, and you need to have your virtual cursor off for this. You cannot do it with it turned on.
PC.
Let's turn it on
Virtual PC.
and get into virtual cursor mode and try and press GL to get to the list view.
No graphics. No lists.
There we go. JAWS is telling me there's no graphics, there's no lists. We can't get that. We cannot get that. Get it there. Turn
Off.
the virtual PC cursor off again. GL.
GL, main region.
Straight to the list view. So make sure it's turned off. Now, unfortunately, there's not an easy way to make sure it's turned off by default when you go into Google Drive. So you really need to know what state it is. But as I said, JAWS key Z.
On.
I've just turned the virtual PC cursor on.
Off.
It's just a toggle. You can just turn it on or off, and JAWS will tell you however it's set up. Okay. Another thing that we need to look at,
Search options.
and I will tab through
Off.
to these,
Zero. My Drive button menu.
is these menus. So they're both the same. So I'm only really going to go through one of them,
New button menu.
and I'll go through the new menu. It's a new button menu, but it's effectively a menu. So this works very similar to how a menu bar would work at the top of the screen. For example, if I went into the file menu now, I would have menus, I would have submenus. It works in a very similar way. So to open this,
Blank. New button menu.
I need to press my down arrow key.
Expanded.
So we heard JAWS say expanded. That's fine. So we can move down again.
Menu. File upload. 1 of 1. Google Docs submenu. 1 of 1. File upload. 1 of 1.
Okay. We're going to constantly keep getting that 1 of 1, and that's just Google Drive itself reporting incorrect information back to the screen reader. There's no real easy way to avoid that. It's just the way it is. So, upload. We can upload files. Let's do that because that actually brings up something pretty straightforward. So let's upload a file. So to do that, we're on the upload.
File upload. 1 of 1.
We can check that by just pressing JAWS key 8 on your number pad, which is the say current line or say current control.
Enter.
Press enter.
Leaving menus. File upload.
Now what we have here is a standard Windows open dialog. So
Explorer pane. Menu. Leaving not selected. My conference recording. Left click. Location : my conference
that's my fault.
header.
Sorry about
Names
that.
my conference. Item D. Explorer pane. Folder documents. Enter.
So go into
Shelf. End.
Documents.
XP 604. Quick open. LRail desktop. Outlook file.
I want to upload
Type
this
colon
PDF
PDF.
document. I found the PDF document. I can select multiple files if I want, so use Control up arrow.
Not selected. Quick start.
So say I
type
want to
colon
get those two,
Hit files of type. Open button.
tab across to open,
Uploading 2 items dialog.
and there we
0.
go.
Screen reader announcement text. 100. 100. 2 uploads complete dialog. Minimize button.
So now we know that's complete.
Close button.
I can
Close.
then close
main
that,
off.
turn the virtual PC cursor back off.
GL. Browser. Tab panel. Main region. Windows keystroke. X.
Back to
Windows.
here.
Untitled doc. Quick start guide.
And those files are in my list. So pretty straightforward. Uploading files, very, very easy. You can do it with multiple files. It's a standard Windows open file dialog box, except for the fact that you can open multiple files at once, and all that's going to do is upload them straight to here. So, Google Docs.
Google Apps. Off.
Let's move on.
New button.
New. Let's open this
Expanded.
menu up.
Menu. Google Docs submenu.
Google Docs.
From a template. 1 of 1. Blank document. 1
No,
of 1.
I want to open a blank document. So let's do that, and we'll see what we end up with.
Enter. Leaving Untitled document dash Google Docs dash Mozilla Firefox. Screen reader support enabled. On page 1.
Now, that is what we wanted to hear. Screen reader support enabled. If you didn't hear screen reader support enabled, you have a problem, and you need to enable it. So the first thing you need to do, if Google Drive does not tell you screen reader support enabled, you need to press the keystroke Control-Alt-Z. Now I will do that at this point, and it'll turn it off.
Alt Control Z. Screen reader support disabled.
So screen reader support is now disabled. We want it turned on.
Alt Control Z. Screen reader support enabled.
Now, a lot of you will never have come across JAWS working in a mode like this before. We are now in what is called applications mode. So if I try and go back to the virtual PC cursor by pressing the plus key on my number pad.
Application mode. Double tap to activate the virtual PC cursor.
You don't want to do that in this situation. Application mode is a way, was introduced, I think it was either in JAWS 16, it may have even been 17, but it was within the past 2 or 3 years. And it was introduced because you are seeing a lot more things like this now. You are seeing a lot more of web-based applications. So programs within a web page, programs that are buried in web pages, which is exactly what Google Docs is. So what you effectively have here is Firefox running as a shell and Google Docs running inside that. So if we ask JAWS what application we are currently in,
Google Docs settings, Firefox.exe, FI.
So there we go. Google Docs settings. So it knows we're in Google Docs, but we're using but we're also in Firefox. So JAWS is smart enough to know that. JAWS is aware of that and knows how to handle this sort of situation. I do not advise you to turn applications mode off when you are in Google Docs because you will get very, very lost very, very quickly. Okay. So your screen reader mode is enabled because of a couple of things. So let's just bash out some text here.
S A period enter.
Okay.
This is a test.
There we go. Now,
this is a test.
one of the things
H.
you are going to notice is that you will have a delay. You will have times when this is a bit sluggish and there is nothing you can, it'll depend purely on your internet connection as to how sluggish it is. So as an example, if I go back to the start of the line, and if I start to arrow through the letters.
T, H, I, S.
So that can get very irritating very quickly. And there is nothing I can do about it. You've got about a second delay before the thing actually responds, depending on your internet connection. And my internet connection is being taxed at the moment because I have video going out, as well as audio, as well as a few other bits and pieces. So that's possibly why this is running a little bit slower than it would be normally. But depending on how you have it set up, especially with a screen reader, you are going to get sluggishness. There is nothing you can do about that. Okay, so this is a standard edit window. As far as JAWS is concerned, you have your normal controls available, so you can control right arrow.
A. Test.
To move through words.
Is.
I can select the text with control shift arrow keys.
Is selected. Selected.
I can then cut that.
Cut select.
Go to the next line.
Paste it is up.
Paste that there. I'm using standard Windows commands, so all I did was select it with control shift right arrow key for a couple of words, cut with control X, paste with control V. Standard Windows commands. Until. But. Until. What happens if we want to get to the menu bar? Now, for those of you who can't see this screen, there is a menu bar at the top of Google Docs. So what happens if we want to get to it? Well, what do you do when you normally want to get to the menu bar? You press the Alt key.
F. Menu. Application menu. File. Edit. To a history. 4 of 7.
No,
Alt plus S.
right. I'm moving through my menus with the arrow keys the same as I would normally.
Bookmarks. 5 of 7. Alt plus B.
No, that's hang on. That's not Google Docs. What's going on?
History. 4 of 7.
Let's drop back out of that. That is actually the menu for Firefox. So this is where different browsers will behave differently. In Google Chrome, there is no menu bar. So pressing Alt followed by F will actually get you to the right place. If you are in other browsers, such as Firefox, you need to do something a little bit different. If we want to go to the file menu of Google Docs, we need to press Alt-Shift-F.
Alt-Shift-F, file submenu, 1 of 9.
And there we go. So we can now
Submenu collapsed. Edit submenu. 2 of
tab
9.
across the menus.
Submenu collapsed. View submenu. 3 of 9.
exactly as you would normally.
Submenu collapsed. Insert submenu. 4 of 9.
So then you've got insert. Okay, we want to open the insert
Image
menu.
link L control plus K.
I'm
1
just
of 1.
using my up and down arrow keys to move through these options.
Equation drawing chart cues. Table T sub. Comment M control. Footnote
And
M
these are all
control
the
plus.
things that you can actually insert into a document,
Special character.
etc., etc.
Insert submenu.
So I'm not going to go into too much detail as to how all of that works because a lot of it should be reasonably obvious. Now, while I'm talking about the menus, if you are not sure if your accessibility mode is turned on, if your screen reader mode is turned on, there's a really, really easy way to check. Mine is turned on, and there's a menu over on the right-hand side called Accessibility. Alt-Shift-A.
Alt-Shifter. Menu. Accessibility submenu. 10 of 9.
And there's all sorts of things you can do in here.
Speak S submenu. Comment C submenu.
You can get it to, there's all kinds of things you can do in here. I won't go into too much detail as to what a lot of that does. Let's turn screen reader mode off.
Alt Control Z. Screen reader support disabled.
And try and get into the accessibility menu.
Alt-Shifter.
Doesn't exist. It's not there. That's a good way to know whether or not your screen reader mode is turned on. If your accessibility menu is missing, you will know it's not there.
Alt Controller. Alt Control Z. Screen reader support enabled.
You need to turn it back on. Now, in another window,
keyboard shortcuts for Google Docs.
In this window here,
Control plus G, common action.
I have a table which was brought up by doing a Google search for Google Docs keyboard shortcuts. That is a very useful thing to look up. And there's a couple of reasons why it's a really useful thing to look up. Number one, it tells you all these different menu commands that I've just gone through. And number two, there are actually
keyboard, JAWS find, reader, enter, left parent, virtual accessibility menu, left parent present when screen reader, input tools, screen reader support.
There are some specific screen reader commands. And I'll go through a couple of these. I will go through a couple of these very, very shortly. Now, one of the things that you can do, and I'm going to bring up Microsoft Word to demonstrate this.
Word, enter. Opening dash Word. Backstage, blank
Okay, we want a blank document.
Document 1 dash.
I don't even need to write anything to do this. If I want to know the font information, so if I want to know what font I'm using, how big it is, what the line spacing is set to, there's a whole load of information I can get to know. There's two ways I can do it. I can either press JAWS key F or I can double press JAWS key F twice quickly. The advantage with double pressing it is that it brings the information up on the screen. So let's do that.
Insertion point formatting 11 point black on black 11 point. Insertion point formatting.
So
insertion point formatting.
Insertion point formatting, that's basically something, a fancy name for the cursor.
11 point. Black on black. Calibri.
So that's telling me it's black on black because there's no text there. It's telling me the font, the size is 11 point.
Normal style.
Normal
Blank.
style.
Line spacing : 1
There's all
lines.
sorts of information I can get out of this.
Blank.
So let's close this.
Alt F4. Keyboard Zoom Cloud Meeting. Untitled keyboard Zoom Untitled document dash Google tab.
And we'll get back into Google Docs.
This test.
Now,
Home. T.
to get that to work, I used, as I said, JAWS key F or JAWS key F twice. Will actually bring it up in the window. What happens if I try it in Google Docs?
No font.
You can't do it. There's no font information. So how do you know what you're doing? How do you know that you've set things up correctly? The reason there's no font information is because there's no direct communication between Google Docs and the screen reader. Now, maybe that's something Google could introduce because there's nothing Freedom Scientific or VFO or the guys who do NVDA or the people who do Zoom Text. Zoom Text with Google Docs, by the way, is a whole other story. Basically, it doesn't work. There's really nothing they can do to actually get that information. It has to be up to Google themselves to do it. So they've kind of gone around it. There's a little bit of a roundabout way they've gone around this problem. And what they've done is they've introduced a whole load of extra screen reader specific commands. And they're usually dual, what they call multi-layer commands. So that basically means, like we saw before in Google Drive, you press one keystroke and then you press another one. So pressing the first keystroke opens the keyboard up for a whole load of other different commands that you can actually do. JAWS has a bunch of these using insert in the spacebar. So what they've had to do with Google Docs is they've had to introduce another way of getting that information, because insert F does not work, or JAWS key F, or whatever the equivalent is in your screen reader of choice, whether that be NVDA, whether it be Narrator, whether it be JAWS, whatever your screen reader of choice is, your font or formatting information command does not work. So they've introduced a whole load of other keystrokes, and these are dual layer keystrokes. We saw those before when we were when we were dealing with Google Drive. So when we press G followed by L, that is a multi-layer keystroke. So the G opened up the keyboard for some more commands, and an L was the final command. So in this case, we're looking at a couple of Control-Alt commands. So what we need to do is I need to press Control-Alt-A followed by Control-Alt-F.
Alt-Controller, Alt-Control-F, normal text font Arial 11 point color black vertical align normal.
So that's how we get our font information. Now there's no way I know of to open that in a window so you can actually deal with it as you choose to. There's no way I know of where you can actually review that information and sort of have a look at it in a leisurely manner. You basically have to put up with it by doing it this way.
Alt-Controller, Alt-Control-F, normal text font Arial 11 point color black vertical align normal.
So we know it's color black. We don't know what the background color is because it didn't tell us. It's Arial, it's 11 point. We know the alignment and a couple of other bits and pieces of information that I've completely forgotten and would probably have to listen to it at least 2 or 3 times to remember all of it. So that will give you a little bit of an idea of how JAWS handles stuff to do with formatting. And this is why I think it's really important that you look for the keyboard commands, because there are other ones like this. There is other information. Well, let's have a look and see what other information we can actually get out of it.
Keyboard shortcuts
so we'll
for
go
keyboard
to our keyboard shortcuts.
Tap blank. Spat blank. Accessibility menu left. Screen reader support.
And we'll go down to screen reader support.
Enable screen reader support link.
So enable screen reader support we've got. There's a few of these.
Speak selection. Row 97.
Okay, so you can actually speak what text you've selected. Okay, that's a handy thing to do. You can do that with a JAWS command as well, but obviously you're not able to do it within here. So they've included a second command.
Speak from cursor location.
Speak from cursor location. Again, there is a JAWS command to do that, and as far as I know, it works in here. But there's another one just in case your screen reader doesn't have
Announce cursor location.
Announce cursor location. Okay, what's that one?
Screen reader support. Holding Control plus Alt. Press and then L. Column 2.
Control-Alt-A, Control-Alt-L. Okay.
Untitled. Alt-Controller. Alt-Control-L. On page 1 of 1 on paragraph 2 on line 1.
Okay, handy information to have. So look, there's not a lot else I can cover. Gives you a bit of an idea what you're in for. Gives you a little bit of an idea what to expect. It's not quite as scary as people think. Google Drive, honestly, if you can find an alternative, I would be doing it, because yeah, is it usable? Yeah. Is it really overly efficient in terms of getting around? Not really. So if you have an alternative way of getting that information, getting those documents either to and from Google Drive, I'd probably be looking to actually do it, unless you can do some serious hunting for keystrokes. And hopefully there's some really super fast ways to get around. There are keyboard commands out there. I just basically looked for Google Docs keyboard commands or Google Drive keyboard commands, and that brought up the lists of what was available here. So how do we get out of this? Well, we just press Control Shift 4. Sorry, Control F4.
New button menu.
And we're back on Google Drive. And the file that we just created has no name, it's untitled. So at that point, you would either have to give it a name. You could also save it within Google Drive itself and give it a name. There's a few different ways you can do it. Any questions on any of this, get in contact with us. I'm not going to touch it all on Google Sheets for two reasons. Number one is I'm really not overly familiar with it. And the second reason is we really don't get too many people who actually ring up and ask about it. So actually, to be perfectly honest, I can't remember the last person who asked about Google Sheets. But if it is something that people want us to have a look at, give me some time to actually have a play around with it and learn a little bit of how to use it. I can't see it being too much different to the way Docs works with a lot of its commands and bits and pieces. I can't see it being too much different. Any of the other Google apps, Gmail, any of that sort of stuff, if anybody wants more information on those, or if anybody wants us to do some more stuff with those, again, please let us know. 1300 791 777 is the phone number, 1300 791 777, or just email info@quantumrlv.com.au, and that information and your email, whatever your queries are, can get passed on to me. Thanks for your time.
Okay, thanks, Danny. If you stop sharing, I might just put those numbers up again on the screen.
Yep.
So
Keyboard shortcuts for Zoom Cloud meetings.
Let me just turn JAWS off so people don't hear it.
Okay, there we are. Okay, so if I'll just, yeah, done. Okay, what have we got? Okay, so first of all, I just found a useful link. So for the shortcut keys, there is a support.google.com/drive. There's a /answer and then a code. I can email that to people. To actually bring up the list when you're in Google Docs is Control / I think, to get to the list of shortcut keys. And yeah, the best way to name within the docs is actually go to File and Rename, or there might be a quick shortcut for renaming the file when you're in it. So they call it rename rather than save as. So thank you for watching this and taking part. As Danny said, if you've got questions, we've got 1300 791 777 or 1300 883 853, and the info line info@quantumrlv.com.au. Okay, thank you. And stop.